Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Christina Brady. She's the founder and CEO over at Luster.ai. We are going to talk about communication. Christina, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. I think communication is one thing, especially, we think about founders and founders moving into sales and salespeople is one thing that vastly overlooked. We've probably talked about it a handful of times on the show here. So I'm really excited to get into communication, some mistakes that we're making, some nuances, and really end with, how do we communicate more effectively?
It's music to my ears and a joy from my heart. I think companies succeed or fail based on how well they communicate. I mean, truly, every piece comes down to that. And so focusing on properly communicating it's paramount to success, at least in my opinion.
I totally agree. And I want to start with, where do we go wrong? Where do we get wrong communicating in a work setting?
One is there's way too much nonverbal communication that happens. There's too much slacking. There's too much text. There's too much email. And that's one, because everybody interprets the written word differently, even down to, like, some people look at a period as being harsh and abrupt. Others look at it as like that's proper punctuation and how you finish a sentence. And you don't know how that person is going to interpret that message. Even most forms of humor or sarcasm or brevity are inherently lost by writing communication. That's one piece. And then the other one is, unless you've trained on communication and being perceptive and in learning how to mirror another person's communication style that differs from your own, we communicate and interpret messages even in person or via Zoom in the way that we communicate. And we are all different. And so everyone accidentally communicates selfishly. And when things are good, that's okay. But when you have to change, when things are hard, when you are going through a difficult time, when you are taking a punch, everything starts to fall apart.
I've got my camera lens in front of the camera, and I forget that other people have their camera lens.
That's right.
Yeah. It was really challenging going from working, we always had Slack or HipChat or some sort of chat mechanism. And I noticed very quickly that I have a dry, sarcastic sense of humor and doesn't translate very well to text unless really knows you.
Exactly. They're just kind of like, wow, he's really kind of harsh and abrupt and sort of unemotional. And you're like, I was just kidding, but that's fine, right? So then we spend more time communicating about the mishaps versus the message you were trying to convey in the first place. And now we're talking about time waste and frustration, and then people feel embarrassed, and it just kind of spirals from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's so many nuances to it. There's the text space. There's the fact that we're communicating over Zoom a whole lot more, and like that we're not like. Maybe we start on the text and we'll get into Zoom and then in person. What are some things that you've seen people communicate, like some mistakes they're making over text? Let's email, Slack, whatever.
One for sure is going back and forth and back and forth. See, when you're writing a message, usually the conversation keeps going while you're responding to a point that was made 3 levels higher. And so it's actually a little bit more difficult to advance a conversation properly when you're in Slack or text message or email, because you're responding, but the conversation's moving faster than that. And I think the way that a lot of companies have addressed that is you have the ability now to click on a message and reply specifically to that message. And I don't know about you, but I'm in several text conversations, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever, where it's just people responding to messages like 3 levels above, because you were like, I was trying to respond at that point, and then you made a different point, and it takes me a while to type. And so I would say it's distracting to do that. Another big mistake that people make is they give constructive or negative feedback in text, which is one of the worst mistakes that you can make. is giving somebody constructive feedback in written form where they can't see your face, they can't hear your voice, they can't see your body language. And that's where things, especially at work, can deteriorate really, really fast.
I imagine, especially if it's negative feedback coming from somebody at a different level in the organization, there's a steep slope pointing down at them, and it's easy to misinterpret.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, and it could be either, right? So certainly, if you just got off of a sales call, for example, and your manager was on the call, and instead of, jumping in a Zoom with you or walking over to your desk, they send you a quick Slack like, hey, a couple of things you could have done better at their call, and that call, blah, 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 right? Whoever is interpreting that message is probably not going to hear it the way that you meant it, in a good or a bad way. But even where I've seen this fall apart with peers, right? So I've had this situation happen several times where, let's say that you've got, for example, an account executive and a CSM. Now, I've managed AE teams and I've managed CSM teams, and I understand that there is some natural friction there when it comes to how they work together and the delineation of roles and responsibilities. I would always hear my CSM team say things like, the AEs treat me like I am their secretary, like they're just giving me all the work that they don't want to do. And AEs are like, but it's my job to sell and be on a call with customers. I've had several scenarios where, after getting off of a call, an AE has emailed a CSM with sort of a hit list of items that they want them to touch on. The CSM gets that email, feels like the AE is bossing them around and telling them what to do and not giving them autonomy. That CSM goes to their manager and says, that AE is bossing me around, they're bullying me, they're telling me what to do, they're treating me like I work for them. That CSM manager then goes to the AE manager and says, hey, your rep is being too harsh and drilling into the CSM. They're being rude. They're turning them off. Can you talk to them? That AE manager then goes to their AE and says, what the heck did you say to your CSM to tick them off? And the AE goes, what are you talking about? We got off of a call and I was just sending them a list of the action items we agreed upon, right? And now that circle goes again and again and again and gets worse and worse and worse. And now relationships are impacted. So that's an example of even peers trying to communicate improperly with each other, or dare I say, assign each other bad intent. And it can go south really fast.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the numerous times I definitely haven't done that. Or a version of that.
Right. Of course, none of us have ever done that, but I'm sure people out there do. Of course.
Yeah. I'm sure it resonates with maybe one or two people, but certainly no, definitely not me. Like, I need to go send an apology Slack right now.
Yeah, you're like, as it turns out, right? And then the managers start to miscommunicate, right? So now the managers are infighting because they're both backing their people up. And I would be willing to bet that in that scenario, both the AE and the CSM and their manager are also communicating via nonverbal channels. So you think about that mess, and then think about how many managers, AEs, CSMs, BDRs, direct reports you have at your organization, and think about a scenario like that happening 4 to 5 times per day, every single day. And yeah, we wonder why we have tension and infighting with partnering organizations. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like that game of telephone.
Yeah.
Where somebody tells, but you've got multiple different loops of it, and everybody's, it's bouncing around.
Right.
I mean, and that's just text communication. Like, when we get to Zoom, it's so hard to read nuance. Do I look at my camera? Do I look at the screen? Do I look at the person? Is my camera? I hate it when people have especially like AEs, like you've got your camera is over here and your screen's over here, and they're just like looking away from you. You're like, come on, you need to fix this right away. Oh, but mine is like, no excuses. You're like, look close to the camera, or I can't handle it.
There's so many issues with Zoom and Zoom communication, and the distractions that are happening, right? When I'm on Zoom, I am on my computer, and I think most people try to say, I'm going to hide notifications. But that doesn't happen, right? Like, even right now, you and I've got my camera, I've got one email here, another email here, I've got my notes down here, I got my phone over there, I got my microphone. It's like there's all these things going on, and you can't tell when somebody is truly distracted on a Zoom or not. And I would be willing to say that probably 80% of the time that people are on Zoom calls in meetings, they're distracted in some way, shape, or form. And when you're distracted, you can't listen to what's actually happening. And so that can be difficult. And also, in-person body language is kind of important to understanding messages, especially. You mentioned that you have a bit more of a sarcastic tone to you, or maybe a drier sense of humor. In person, you would likely come across a little bit warmer just because of body language. But on Zoom, that could be interpreted as like, oh, like really icy, really cold. So you have the benefit of somebody's face. But then to your point, like if I'm doing this right now, like, am I taking notes and listening to you, or am I answering an email and not listening to you? You just don't know. And then you're wondering the whole time, like, are you listening to me? What do I do?
Yeah. Are you really here? Are you really? Yeah. Or you can, because you can see if somebody's in a dark room, you can see their screen or the light on their face changing all the time. You're like, I could literally see, like, I can almost see the Chrome tabs change as you go and do this.
You're definitely on YouTube right now because I can see the red banner on your head. Like I can see it.
Yeah. And this is, we go from text, we go to video, even in person, there are gaps.
Yeah. There's big gaps in person because, again, communication style and how that translates through body language is different based on how you communicate. Right. So if you look at one of the methodologies I talk about all the time is DISC methodology. So if you are a high D style of communicator, for example, and you cross your arms, you're thinking, right? Like high D communicators will cross their arms, like they'll kind of nod a lot when they're thinking. But then if you think about a high S communicator, when they cross their arms, it means that they're uncomfortable. Because when they think, they actually open their body up. And when they're uncomfortable, they close their body off. And so if you're a high D communicator talking to somebody who's an S, you may not interpret this as I'm making them uncomfortable. And so you'll keep going and then they'll get more and more uncomfortable and you're not picking up on that nuance. And so I think body language in person is important to understand and really be able to dynamically read somebody's body language, because a lot of times their words and their inflection don't match how they actually feel. Because at work, we don't always feel safe communicating how we feel. Another place in person it can fall apart is think about the concept of a team meeting, right? In a team meeting, you're rolling out some sort of change or a new policy or a new expectation, whatever. And the folks in the room who are the more enthusiastic communicators, more of like the culture leaders of the team, are always the ones who speak up. And they come across then as the ones that have higher acumen, more bought in. They're so involved. Managers tend to lean toward those people and be like, wow, what a great example of a wonderful employee. Well, you also have quieter employees where it's not their communication style or comfort level to chime in that way in a group setting, but it doesn't mean they don't have amazing ideas and it doesn't mean they're not bought in. But what leaders do when they're unaware is they'll look at that person who's quiet and say, hey, I haven't heard from you yet. Why don't you chime up? And then that person is like, this is
panic.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to chime up. Like, I guess that I will. And then leaders think they're doing a great job developing those people by on one-on-one saying things like, I would love for you to speak up in 3 meetings this week. I just want you to get good at speaking. And what they're missing is you want that person's idea in a really, really comfortable way. And so instead of saying, hey, I'd love to hear you speak up more in meetings, it's, I notice that you sit back, you're a little bit quieter in meetings. I'm guessing that's a little bit more comfortable for you. I still want to hear your ideas and your thoughts. What's a comfortable way for you to share those things with me? Right? So there's a difference in how you approach those people.
What have been some comfortable ways? I have 2 leaders on my team. And one is a little more, outspoken and comfortable sharing. And similar to me, I could jump into a meeting and talk forever unless we're following like a framework. And we try and do some for our executive check-ins, because otherwise they just turn into hour-and-a-half conversations about nothing. And I have one who's more similar to me, and I'm obviously loud and annoying. And then I have another leader who's amazing, but she's quiet. And so how do I get the most out of her?
It's a crazy answer. You ask her. Because people like that who are quiet are often worried that they're not going to be seen. And then they're worried that the moment they have to be seen, they're going to say the wrong thing and they're going to ruin it. So it just perpetuates this idea of, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to sit back. And then a lot of anxiety starts to build up with those people. So one, it's not forcing someone to communicate in any setting or forum where they're inherently uncomfortable, or more importantly, where they don't feel safe. Safety comes into a lot of this. A lot of folks who are quieter also are inherently uncomfortable sharing opinions with folks that are a little bit louder and more verbose because they're afraid they're going to be interrupted and not listened to. So folks who are quiet, when they do speak up, every time they're interrupted, even in a positive way with people agreeing with them, it actually shuts them down a little bit more. So with those folks, one, again, it comes down to recognizing, I noticed that outwardly you're a little bit quieter in these types of settings. but I know you have amazing ideas. They're likely bouncing around in your head somewhere. Do you have a desire to ever share those sometimes? And if so, what is the right kind of forum for me to make sure that your voice is in the mix in a comfortable way for you? So, and in that initial conversation, they might say like, nope, I'm great, I'm fine. And you just keep making it okay for them to lean in the way that they want to. And the more you do that, you're going to bring them out of their shell. And they're going to say, well, no, now that you mention it, I did have a thought about that. And they're going to start pouring out. And the number one thing that you can do is listen, nod, don't interrupt them, don't finish their sentence for them, don't try to solution right away. Let them get comfortable speaking out. And the more comfortable they get and realize that it's safe, the more that they will do that in the way that you need them to.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
We were kind of touching on different communication styles and personality styles. I'd love to talk a little bit more about how does that style impact your ability to communicate effectively?
How does your communication style impact your ability to communicate effectively? Biggest thing is everyone communicates subjectively. So I take in messages, I say messages, I interpret intent, all based on my communication style. And so that means that I am misunderstanding what's being said to me most of the time and what the driving factor is behind the person communicating to me. So everybody seeks to be understood, right? And it's an old adage, right? Seek to understand before being understood. And we say that the same way that we know how to take care of our bodies and to be healthy, and yet none of us do it properly, right? We know that we have to understand, but there's this inherent biological need to be heard and valued and validated. And so everybody approaches a conversation looking for my validation, right? I have an amazing idea and I want to be validated. And other people are talking, but I haven't been validated yet. And so I'm just going to keep railroading through until I get validated, or I'm going to shut down, depending on your type of communication style. There's another kind of communication style where they'll just kind of go along to get along, right? So I have an idea, I have a thought, I don't think this is the right move, but I don't really want to make waves, so I'm going to go along to get along. And with those people, the more they do that, the more unhappy they get and morale starts to tank. And then they wind up leaving an organization. So everyone's stuck in their own bubble and trying to be heard or seen or validated in some way, shape, or form can often be little tiny chips that break down the culture of an organization.
I find it's such a hard idea to beat into your head that I need to, when I'm communicating something, I need to think about the lens and, like, I guess the camera analogy. I need to think about the settings on my camera of how I'm interpreting it. And then I need to look at the settings on their camera. It's not just the lens, it's the color balance, it's the aperture, it's the, all those different settings. And to have to remember all of this is, and to decipher what other, communication styles and personalities of all the different individuals, it's a huge cognitive load.
Oh my gosh. And that's a really great metaphor too. Because on top of that, there's the, what are the environmental factors that are impacting how you're showing up today? Do you have something difficult happening in your life? Is it raining over there, right? Do you have something else that is on your mind that is impacting you from showing up the right way? And you may or may not feel comfortable with that, but folks' scenarios and what's happening in their life also impacts the way that they communicate with you and everybody else or interpret a message, right? Like when I'm in a bad mood, I interpret messages negatively, even if they're positive, right? Because it's like you're wearing a cloak of sadness and everything penetrates through that cloak, and and it's like it's harder for you to be like, yeah, no, I get it, I'm feeling really sad today, but I'm so happy for you, or yes, I can get on that project. Or you might be really excited about something, but because of what's going on in your life, you can't show excitement, and now you have to spend the next 3 weeks apologizing to that person for not being enthusiastic enough about their idea because you were going through something completely separate. So it's like communication is just this iceberg, and we see the very tip of the iceberg, however jagged it is, and we don't know what is sitting underneath it. And unfortunately, by no fault, most people don't care. Like, you're not going into a conversation thinking, I want to show up as a safe person in this conversation. I want to communicate in a way that can kind of break down your walls and your barriers. I want to understand the context of how you're walking in the room. Because if we thought about that before every single conversation, we'd never have the conversation. So we just barrel through.
Totally. And I think it makes it even more complex when you have to think about, to go back to the camera scenario, if I'm an organization level up, or if I'm a level up in the org chart, and then all of it changes if we're communicating in the same style, or we're on the same level, or I'm below or I'm above, it changes things, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Your role is massive in how Zoom with the thumbs up.
Thanks, Sam.
You're just Zoom. Your role is massive in determining how you not only act, but how you are interpreted. One of the things I talk about a lot is, have you heard of the Stanford prison experiment in the 70s?
I think so. Yeah.
This is like a wild, we'll call it cautionary tale of how role impacts your persona and how you show up. So basically, Stanford wanted to do a prison study where in the basements of the university, they built out an effective prison. And they got volunteers to join this experiment. And the volunteers were anywhere from homemakers to lawyers to doctors to accountants to retail work. I mean, like a massive mix of people and all these different job functions. And they got everybody together and they split them in half completely randomly. And they said, okay, this half, you're the prisoners, and this half, you're the prison guards. And we are going to enact a 1 to 2 day role play scenario where you are now, for all intents and purposes, a prison guard and you are a prisoner. You are a criminal. If you want to just read a wild study of human behavior and how your role impacts your sense of worth, look into this study because it went haywire. It got so bad where people existed, like, you have a lawyer making $500,000 a year that was assigned a prisoner that is sitting in a jail cell sobbing and trying to figure out like how to escape the jail that they're not actually in because the role became so immersive that they couldn't separate themselves from the role, right? So they had, a guy with no job as a prison guard basically battering a lawyer who was pretending to be a prisoner, and they were going along with it. I mean, so they had to shut this thing down because there were severe psychological effects that actually happened. So look into it. But what does that tell us? That tells us that our role at work plays into our self-worth and our importance so much that we can lose ourselves in it. And then when we try to communicate, that also then plays a factor. We start to think bad leaders start to think that they have the ability to give people feedback on their personality, feedback on their feelings instead of what to do with their feelings. Sometimes leaders think they have a right to show tough love. I'm sorry, you're not their parent. You don't have the ability to give them feedback on feeling something. You can coach on behavior, but not feelings, right? So you can't coach somebody on their identity just because you're their boss. So that overstepping does start to happen and trust can get diminished. It's wild to look into the data behind this.
I think there was a documentary about the prison experiment as well, wasn't there?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of really kind of messed up psychological experiments. There's one about learned helplessness that also kind of plays into communication that just, I geek out over these things. I've been studying sort of the psychology of how people communicate at work for the better half of 10 years. And these experiments really show human behavior and how it actually hasn't evolved that much since then. Like, we are who we are. And so awareness and high EQ is so paramount.
So it's all, if everything is so complex, there's no solution then? It's just, it's hard. Deal with it?
Yeah, we're screwed. No, we're screwed.
Okay, cool. End the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, the end.
Yeah.
Go forth and be merry, everyone. The way out of it is acknowledging the elephant in the room. And what that sounds like is you can tell somebody your intent in a conversation, or you can recognize when you are displaying bad habits and proactively address them. The counteract to poor communication is relationship. If you are a poor communicator and you don't have a relationship with your people, you're going to lose. If you're a poor communicator, but you have a good relationship with your people, they trust you, they understand you, they will naturally start assigning you good intent, and they will make amends for mistakes that you make in communication, right? So the first thing is, I want to have a feedback conversation with you. There's a couple of constructive things, and I want you to hear that I'm trying to help you. And if at any point in time this isn't helpful, talk to me, we'll take a break, we'll move forward, right? Or if you recognize that you're getting too intense, or maybe, it's acknowledging and saying like, I'm getting a little bit too heated, I'm not communicating the way that I want to, I'm so sorry. And it's acknowledging like, we have to have a difficult conversation, I might not get this right. And so I'm going to try, I'm going to work on getting better. It's always just acknowledging I have great intent with what I'm trying to do, and I want to communicate properly here. By going into a conversation, if the person says to you, first thing I want to make sure is that I'm communicating this properly. So work with me, give me a little bit of grace. You immediately disarm, right? It's like now you're like, okay, like let me try to hear what the message is. You do that little bits at a time while building relationships with people, then you don't have to be the perfect communicator all the time because you've built the foundations where people hear you regardless of the words that come out of your mouth.
Mm-hmm. So it's the relationship first, and that'll kind of rise the tide a little bit.
Yeah, it goes back to concept of radical candor, right? Like I don't have the ability to challenge you directly. I'm going to come across as obnoxious if I do that, if I haven't shown you that I care personally. And when you work with people and you're spending this time with them, especially if you're a leader, you have to care about your people and their well-being personally. And you have to find a way to show them that you do that. And you can do that in all kinds of different ways. And also, you don't have to show up as perfect. You don't have to show up infallible. I have learned, and it's been a lesson of hard knocks and white knuckling for me, that acknowledging your mistake and not making somebody point it out to you is one of the best ways you can build a relationship with somebody, is not forcing the person who has been, to use a strong word, victimized by your poor communication. Don't force that person to come to you and tell you your mistake. That feels unsafe. Be self-aware enough to identify, I probably was a little ineffective in that, and I need to make it right, and I'm going to proactively address that. The more that you do that, it's money in the relationship equity bank.
Sounds like just that little bit of openness, admitting to being not a perfect person really opens the door to, I'm not a perfect person, you're not a perfect person, let's get better together.
That's right. And even for you, right? You mentioned at the top of this, like, I tend to be a little bit more monotone in my communication. I'm a little bit more, even you telling me that, I'm interpreting you differently in a better way, right? Because I'm not like, wow, this person's really annoyed by me. He can't wait to get off of this call. I'm not saying the right thing. Instead, I acknowledge that this is the way that you communicate, and now we're having a very real conversation, and there's trust there. So we will naturally do that. You just have to consciously do it. Like, consciously let people know, like, hey, FYI, sometimes I talk really big with my hands and I get really, really excited, and that's just kind of what I do. So bear with me, right? Like, and people go, oh, okay, and now it's endearing versus threatening, or kind of like, whoa, you're coming in with a lot of energy.
Fair enough. I've had podcast guests tell me, like, are you okay? Are you mad? Because my face, like, this is my neutral face.
That's right.
And if you're listening to the podcast, it's a scary face. It's not a happy face. Yeah.
I'm on the other end of it, and I can confirm. No, but it's but that's true though. I was recording some kind of thought leadership and content for another company recently, and the person who I adore, who was like giving me the prompt questions, he was like, okay, so look at me, the camera's right here, and answer to me. And so he asks me a prompt question, and as I'm looking at him, the look on his face, it was sort of like the whole time I was talking,
like,
and
disgusted.
I was trying. Just like somebody farted in the room and he's smelling it while I'm talking. It was like that look, right? And so I'm trying to give this answer and maintain. And then after I finished the first answer, I was like, "Are you okay?" And he was like, "Oh God, yeah, that was great. Okay, next one." I was like, and in my mind, I was like, "Okay, clearly this is just, And again, I train on this thing, but in the back of my mind, I'm chuckling because I'm like, I actively now have to get over the fact that I'm perceiving something different than what you mean, and I have to move past it.
Yeah, we'll just save that as, okay, something's going on over on that side of the camera, and it's nothing to do with my side of the camera.
Nothing to do. You say that I'm doing great. I'm gonna keep going, and I'm gonna probably acknowledge the fact that you're unaware of the face that you're making, which is now it's just funny. And now he and I laugh about that because I brought it up after, and I was like, "You were making this face," and I made the face. I was like, the whole time he goes, "Oh my God, it was." And I was like, "Yes." Funny. And I was like, and I read it that way, but other people are going to be intimidated. So fix your face. Now I could say something to him like, fix your face, because we have this deep relationship where he'll laugh. If that was the first time I was meeting him, and after that conversation, I was like, yeah, I fix your face. He'd be like, why don't you get the hell out of here? Right. So that relationship does matter. It really does.
That is I think I would laugh so hard if somebody told me to fix my face.
Fix your face. Making me feel weird.
Yeah. 100%. But I think we understand each other. And so if you're saying that, I'm like, great. No context, Christina coming in being like, hey, fix your face.
Yeah. You'd be like, wow.
Is it broken?
Faith, right? Like we start to
Let's go.
go. Yeah.
So I love the radical candor piece, and I've definitely seen it work well. We all read the book back in the day, like when it came out, 8,000 years ago, and it feels like, and applied it well, misapplied it a whole bunch. Where are some things that you've seen people get wrong with radical candor, and how do we kind of approach it the right way?
People focus too heavily on the challenge directly and don't know how to show that they care personally. And everybody thinks they care personally means we have to be best friends. We have to go out for drinks after work. We have to go to Topgolf. We have to get and have deep, in-depth conversations about like our lives and like all of those things can happen. I'm not dogging Topgolf or drinking. But like folks understand because of, you think about role versus identity, because of the fact that we are at work together, I am in a role where, especially if I'm your manager, I have to challenge you directly. So we feel like, okay, I already have the permission to challenge you directly. Okay, now I have to think about how I care about you personally. And it's difficult because I think a lot of leaders don't know how to do that properly and with the right amount of boundaries. And sometimes they don't go far enough and sometimes they go too far, right? Like you can be the leader that's trying really hard to connect with your people and you ask them inappropriate questions, and I'll give you an example of asking an inappropriate question when a manager was trying to care for me personally. And again, I train on this. And so I identified you have really great intention, but it's the wrong question. And an example was, after I got engaged years ago when I was working at a company, I remember I had a manager who was a brand new manager and he goes, "Oh, how was your weekend?" And I was like, "Oh, it was great. I got engaged." He goes, "Oh my gosh, that's so great. When are y'all going to get married?" And I said, "Well, we're going to aim for it, And then he was like, "So do you want to have kids?" And I was like, I was like, "Well, I don't know." And he's like, yeah. Like, I know. And they start talking about like him and his wife and their family planning. And she's like, "I just feel like you would be a great mother." And I was like, "I just met you." So, and again, I get that he was trying to relate to me on a personal level because he was married and he did have kids and his mind went to, "Oh, you're getting married. You're a woman. Women like being mothers." And they're thinking, "I should ask you about that." Right. So it's an example of where you can go too far when you're trying to care personally and you can kind of go off the rails a little bit on that one. So that's one of the big mistakes. And the other one, I talk a lot about this concept of tough love and how we don't have a right to do that or how we misdefine it. It's because in my career, I've had several managers who were like, "I'm just going to give you some love." I was like, "Please don't. You can give me direct feedback, but like, I don't need your tough love. I just want you to tell me where I'm going wrong so I can be better and make some money and then like go home and live my life." Right. So and I think a lot of leaders think that this idea of care personally is like, "Look, I'm going to give you the tough love that you need to give. I don't need you to show up like that." Right. Like that's not your job. And so again, it comes down to this. How do I, as a leader in a professional scenario where there is that filter of your role versus my role, how do I show you that I care personally?
Totally. I've seen both, overcorrecting, undercorrecting, on that. Is so much of this comes down to like a style question, like does radical candor, does that kind of align with your personality? What are some other examples of, methodologies or frameworks that people can try on? Because if radical candor or DISC or whatever doesn't work for them or it doesn't resonate, there are other tools out there. So I'd love your perspective on, what else have you seen work? What else should people look at when they're trying to solve these problems?
Yeah, I would say one is you don't necessarily have to follow a specific methodology to be a great leader. They can help and they can influence you, but the message certainly isn't like, look, pick one of the 17 different methodologies and stick to it. If you are the kind of person where you're like, this does not come naturally to me, I need a framework. Another one I've seen be really successful is the concept of situational leadership. And that is you have folks that are in these different quadrants of development and how you have to show up and lead them varies depending on what quadrant they're in. And people, based on their scenario, what's happening at work, what's happening in their lives, can move and shift from one quadrant to another. So to give you an example of what the quadrants look like by drawing on a metaphor, which is one of my favorite things to do, think about when you are teaching somebody how to drive. So if you're teaching someone how to drive and you are in quadrant number 1, it means the person you're teaching how to drive, like they may not even know what a car is. Like they're so new to this, they have no idea. Right. And so if you don't follow a framework, you might put them in the car, slam the door and say, learn by doing, slap the hood, send them on their way, and they drive into a tree. Right. So like That's one way of leadership that doesn't work, right? So situational leadership says, okay, I'm recognizing that you are in quadrant 1. So I'm going to get in the driver's seat. I'm going to put you in the passenger seat. I am going to show you how to drive. I don't want you to do anything but watch. I'm going to show you this is what the wheel does. I'm going to explain the car. I'm going to do all of it. You're going to sit and be a passenger, and I'm going to show you what to do. And I'm going to do that until you show enough acumen to move into quadrant 2, right? And quadrant 2 is, okay, now we're going to switch places. I'm going to put you in the driver's seat. I'm going to be in the passenger seat. I'm going to have a wheel that works over here, and I'm going to have a brake. And so if I see you veering off course, I'm just going to come in real gently. I'm going to course correct you, right? Like a yoga instructor. I'm going to just move your hips around, settle in. Does that feel, okay, great. Like I'm letting you do, but I'm just going to go into, so you're in quadrant 2, right? Recognizing what does quadrant 1 look like versus quadrant 2. Okay, now quadrant 3, I'm still in the car with you, but you're in the driver's seat. I'm in the back seat. I don't have a brake. I don't have a wheel. All I can do is talk to you from here, but I am trusting you in full control of this car, but you have my influence, right? I'm there with you. Quadrant 4 is, I feel comfortable enough to get out of this car and let you go drive on your own. And when you come back, we're going to sit and talk about how it went, and we're going to stay there, right? And then something that can move you into a different quadrant is, I taught you really well how to drive on an automatic transition, and now it's going to be stick shift. Guess what? You might shift all the way back into phase 2 because you've never driven a stick shift before. You may not have to go back to quadrant 1, but you're probably sitting in quadrant 2 where you need me there with the little baby steering wheel and the little brake, right? You might need me there. So situational leadership is identifying where people are and then acting accordingly and being so hypersensitive to when they are moving and shifting and how you have to show up for them. A way to fail at situational leadership is what a lot of, again, I would say green leaders do is somebody approaches them with a problem and they're like, well, what do you think you should do? And then they pat themselves in the back like, that was so good. Like I mirrored it back to them and now they're going to go solve their own problem and I'm such a good manager. But unless that person's in quadrant 4, you shouldn't be doing that, right? So that's why it can kind of help you to identify how to work with people.
Something you said there just triggered a bit of an aha moment for me. It sounded like you said that people can be in different situations. The same person can be in quadrant 4 for one task and quadrant 1 for another task.
Correct.
I hadn't considered that.
Yeah. And that, in fact, most people are at all times. And so
it's obvious now that I'm on this side of it, but
yes,
yeah,
no,
that guy didn't know.
Right. And then it goes back to the thing of like, how do I show somebody that I care personally? Watch them enough to know where they are so that you can know how to actually help them and be an effective leader. Right? Don't pare it back and make somebody solve their own issue unless you know that for that particular, they're in quadrant 4. Otherwise, you're not helping them. You're frustrating them. So that's where methodologies can be helpful.
And I know we talked a little bit about DISC. DISC is kind of a framework for assessing is it preference of communication style?
Correct. Communication, not personality, not behavior. That those are influencers, but it's really how you communicate and how you are perceived.
Gotcha. I don't want to go into the depths of all of them, but if somebody's sitting there listening to like, okay, radical candor seems interesting or situational leadership, can you recommend some resources that they may want to check out?
The great thing about all of these methodologies is there is so much information just on the open web. Like none of these are ones where you have to go buy the book and read the whole thing or you have to pay for a blog or anything. I mean, you could go Google any of these things right now and get a plethora of information and graphs. And that's kind of why I like these types of methodologies. You don't want to be tethered to something. And when I say tethered, I mean, at prior companies that I've worked at, they've picked, for example, a sales methodology. Right now, when you pick a sales methodology and you build your entire sales process rooted in that methodology, and then you go pay some company millions of dollars to build that, you better hope you picked right because you're now tethered to that, right? And let's say that you get a new product or new people, or there's an economic change or an environmental change, and you now have to tweak your process. You are tethered. You have to go back to that company and say, shoot, something changed. We need you to come back and redo all of this. So what I like about things like what we're talking about in these different methodologies is you're not tethered to them. Honestly, my leadership style at this point is an amalgam of all of these different things. I think of them in my head as like there's a bunch of different just tools I can pull off the shelf when I need to and based on the scenario. I'm like, I'm going to deploy a little situational leadership, or you know what, I'm going to lean into DISC for this conversation, or like, hey, this person, I'm going to get some situational leadership out and take a gander, right? So it's learn as much as you can about the different methodologies, and then all of them can be a tool.
I love that. It's the tool belt analogy, not the,
right.
This is the way I build a house.
That's it.
Love it. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. This has been really fun. I do want to save a little bit of time to talk about what you're working on lately, because we had a chat in the pre-interview and it sounds super interesting, especially for our particular audience. So I'd love to talk to me about your startup that has recently emerged from stealth mode.
Yes. So my startup is called Luster. It's Luster.ai. And we emerged out of stealth mode, and we are playing in the generative AI conversational intelligence space, but we are focusing hard on the lack of ability for go-to-market teams to practice. And so the idea for this came from, you think about airline pilots, or you think about race car drivers or golf simulators. There is a simulated perfect practice environment for almost everything that we do. And at work, practice either doesn't exist, or we practice on the people that we then have to go and ask for money from. And that doesn't really go well. And so I am taking, kind of my breadth of knowledge, being an account executive, being a frontline manager, being a director, being a VP of sales, being a CSO, and now into my founder CEO role, and really figuring out like this lane of practice. How does that make training stronger? How does that make enablers stronger by giving them the data they need to actually have a data-driven learning and development curriculum? How do managers identify at any point in time what the actual skill gaps of their people are? And how do you address those without having to retrain an entire organization? And so we're taking our time to custom build this product to not be a cool bot that you can talk to, but to actually be a dynamic tool built very specifically for go-to-market teams and this use case. So I'm excited. It's been the time of my life. It's been fun to watch this thing come to life and really get it right.
Love that. You mind if I ask a couple questions about how you got into the startup?
Yeah.
So I'd love to understand, one of the things we've been, I've got a community where we talk about, founder-led sales, and I'm writing the next book, and it's going to be a mixture of basically, how do you find product market fit? How do you step into the sales role as a first-time founder? And then how do you build a sales team? And so I'm always curious. You're kind of at this stage. What was your process, or what did you do for finding, people to talk to, some customer development interviews? What did you do? How many did you do? I'd love to understand what that process looked like.
Yeah. I would say where this has been wonderful is I partnered with the High Alpha studio to sort of bring this concept to life. And so I was able to get not only my funding from them, but they had also done a lot of competitive research in this area to see, hey, what tools are already playing here? What are the faults with those tools? And how do we address that by really building a beautiful, immersive product for the end user versus just kind of something that's cool that you can use? And so for one, I've had a ton of unbelievable support from High Alpha, which again, they're a venture capital studio out of Indianapolis. A lot of wonderful companies have come from there. And on the flip side of that, the benefit of me, the reason I wanted to lean into this product, this company, and build it is my entire career has been here. I've spent the last decade building enablement technology for go-to-market teams, launching that, being an enabler and a sales leader myself. My entire network are the people that look and think just like me, and they're also the people that I'm building this product for. So I'm able to go in and leverage my experience being a salesperson, being a leader, being an enabler, being an executive, and build that into this and basically make up for all of the gaps that I had. So I am very lucky that I speak the language of the end user, and I'm able to tap my network and very easily say, you must have this problem because I had this problem. And they go, yes, of course I have that problem. And I say, I want your real feedback on if you think that this solves that. The second piece of it is you have to have a maniacal focus when you talk about product market fit of what you're solving. And I think the mistake that a lot of companies are making right now is trying to go too big and too broad. Right. And so for me, I don't want to replace sales training. I actually think there is a very useful place for sales training. Right. If you think about bike riding, like I have to be trained on what the bike is, how to ride the bike. I want to watch somebody do that. I want to understand that. I have to be trained on it. But right now at work, we go from I am watching somebody ride a bike to now I'm in a bike race and I'm not winning and I don't know why. So I don't want to replace the coaching that happens after you've performed. That's important. I want to make that coach better by having some data and actionable insights on where you made a mistake without having to listen to an entire gong call. I don't want to replace the training, focusing very, very specifically on giving a safe place for repetitive practice and only doing that and not trying to tap the other buckets, because I think that there's not a lot of shakeup that has to happen there.
I love it. I'm looking forward to seeing more. If people are interested in checking it out, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can also visit Luster.ai, fill out our marketing form, and we'll hop on a call and we'll talk to you about it.
All right. I'll throw a link to Luster and to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And so if anybody's looking to get in touch, the links are wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been great. Great getting a chance to learn from you. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.